Hey everybody, Manny Telebear here. We're now on day 67 of the seven-figure climb. And in this video, I'm going to just kind of give you a glimpse into my backstory. We're going to talk about when I bought my first business, when I bought the pool room. I'm going to kind of walk you through that. I can tell you I'm having some trouble with the voice. And so we're going to do this in two videos. Another reason we're doing it in two videos is the story is a little bit too long to do in one video. And so we're just going to give you some insights. And so I actually graduated and I got a degree in marketing. And it took me 3 years. I got a 2 year degree. I spent around 3 years. I took a few extra courses. And I'll be honest with you, I am not using anything that I learned from that degree. And I'm an expert in marketing and strategy. What they were teaching in school was what I would call institutional advertising or Fortune 500 marketing, and it had nothing to do with small business owners. So everything I'm teaching now is all about small business. And again, I am very pro college. I think it's important to get a degree if you can. And I'm very, very happy I got one, even though I really don't use it. In my opinion, if I were to look at everything that I had done in school, probably the year of accounting would probably have been my best investment because I really enjoy that and I think that's very, very valuable. But like I said, I'm still pro school, but I don't really use any of that. And so what's interesting is the whole time I was in school, I was a pool player. I played pool about every day, pretty much. And a friend of mine and I, most of the time, we drove around looking for pool rooms to buy or looking for a building to rent so that we can start a pool room. And we did that the whole time I was there, and we didn't end up finding anything. And so I graduated and I left Ball State in Muncie and I went to Indy and I basically did a lot of collections jobs. I worked for the Internal Revenue Service, Household Finance, Sally Mae. I just did a lot in collections. And what's interesting, I was living in Indy and there was a pool room in Carmel, and I would go there every weekend to play pool. And I was there pretty much every weekend. And one day while I was in there, overheard the owner talking to a guy about selling pool table. And so I walked up and I said, "Why are you selling a pool table?" And he said, "Well, we're selling the pool tables because I'm closing and I'm selling everything off. I'm going to close the place because we're not making any money." And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually tell you the backstory of the actual pool room that I bought. And we're going to tell you about Bernie and how Bernie acquired the pool room. And then we'll come back because I think it's really valuable you understand all of this stuff. And so what ultimately happened, the pool room was called Lenny's, first of all, Lenny's pool room. That's what it was called. And what had happened is there's a guy, his nephew's name was Lenny, and he wanted to open a pool room and call it Lenny's. And he actually knew the person who owned the strip mall, and they were friends. And they started having these conversations about opening a pool room. And what ultimately happened is they basically said, yeah, the owner of the building said, yeah, yeah, we could open a pool room and you could run it, and we could split the profits. And this would work out really, really good. So the guy ends up going and he buys 30 tables. Now, I don't know what he did with the other 15 of them, but he bought 30 brand new Dynamo drop pocket tables. And drop pocket tables they don't have a ball return. And the model was selling table time by the hour. So $6 an hour to play pool. And so he bought the lights, he bought the tables, and he basically set this room up and they carpeted it. They got the paint in. They basically cleaned the place up. They set up a counter. They had everything set up, but they hadn't negotiated a lease yet. And what happened when they went to sit down to negotiate a lease, the building owner wanted $6,000 a month for the building, for the space, for the 4,000 square feet. And this guy said, "There's no way I can give you 6,000 a month. We'll never make any money. The only person who will make money is you." And they went back and forth. And what happened here, my understanding of it, is this guy's bought the tables. He's bought the lights. They spent money on an electrician to drop the lights. They've got everything in place. They've painted the place. They've spent all this work and effort and money. And so the owner of the building felt like he had the guy in a corner because the guy's got all of this investment already. So he can't afford not to do the deal. But he wasn't having any of it. And so what the owner assumed was the owner of the building assumed they would figure something out. And what ultimately happened, this guy said, I'm not doing this deal. I'm not doing the deal with you. I own these tables. I'm going to come in on Monday. I'm going to bring a truck and I'm going to take all of these tables and lights and everything in here. And I'm just putting it in storage. And the owner of the building kind of panicked and didn't think that would happen. The problem is this building was set up to be a pool room. If they decided not to have a pool room in here, it was going to take time to find someone else to lease this building, and they were going to have to do all of these changes to it because it was pretty much set up for a pool room. And so he brought his friend in and he said, no, let's sit down and work out a lease. And he got the lease down to $2,000 a month, which is what it should be. But his friend was so mad because he felt like he was being taken advantage of. He said, I'm not doing a deal with you. I'm not running this place with you. I don't want you as a partner, and I'm done. And so what happened? He said, I'll tell you what I will do. I will sell you everything at the cost that I have in it. You can take everything and you can go forward yourself. And so that's what happened. The building owner bought all the equipment. So the building owner buys the equipment, has all this equipment sitting in this place. Now, this is the thing. They have a sign up, Lenny's Pool Cue. They have tables, they have lights, they have balls, they have a counter, they have pop, candy, they have everything they need except someone to sit in the seat. And so the owner of the building basically starts running ads to find someone to buy the place. And what's interesting is I found out later that a lot of my friends went and talked to these guys, but no one would buy it because he was wanting way too much money for the equipment. And Bernie didn't know anything about the pool room business, but Bernie knew about business. He knew about how to make money in businesses. He'd owned several muffler shops. He ended up buying a bowling alley, and he had owned many businesses. He had land, he had buildings, he had property all over Indianapolis. And so they sat down and they worked out a deal. And Bernie basically agreed to buy the place. He gave the guy a deposit. The guy gave him the keys to the building, and Bernie went home. And when he went home, you got to keep in mind again, Bernie wasn't a pool room owner. He'd never done anything like this. And what happened is he started Googling, he started making phone calls, and he found out he way overpaid for all of the equipment in there. And the reason they wanted to sell to Bernie, to give you an example, the guys, there's 30,000 equipment in the place, and the guy sold it to Bernie for 55,000 or something. And Bernie had gave him a deposit, and it was going to be a monthly payment on the equipment. He was buying it. And so the guy was just really making a lot of money on the equipment. And so Bernie did some reviews and basically spent about 6 or 7 hours and figured out he was getting robbed. And the next morning he called the guy. And he left a message, and the guy didn't call him back. In the afternoon, he called the guy, and the guy didn't call him back. And so Bernie just got in his car, and he wrote up a right of refusal letter. In Indiana, you have 3 days to basically walk away from any deal. And so Bernie went to the guy's office. The guy's secretary was there, and Bernie gave her the letter. And he said, here, I need you to sign that you got this letter, and need you to sign that you got these keys. And I'm exercising my 3-day right of refusal, and I need my check back within 10 days, or I'll just get an attorney, and I will file a lawsuit. And so he went home, and the next day this guy called him. They went back and forth, they negotiated, and Bernie ended up buying the place. Now, he still got robbed. He still paid too much, but he still got way better deal than he was getting in the first place. And so Bernie bought the place, and it was doing really well. The overhead was $3,000 a month, and he was bringing in $15,000 a month. And when Bernie bought the place, there was a Kroger store, which is called an anchor store. So we had Kroger that was an anchor store, and then there was a drugstore And after the drugstore, there was a movie rental place, and then there was a car rental place, and then there was a paint store, and there was an appliance store, and a hair cutting place, and a hardware store. The strip mall was completely full. And Bernie was in the perfect situation because what would happen, parents would drive up to the door, drop their kids off, and then they would drive down the parking lot and go shop at Kroger. And Bernie was getting all of this traffic from Kroger, and he did really well. Like I said, he was spending $3,000 a month, bringing in 12 to 15,000 a month. And this place was selling pop, candy, and table time. There was no alcohol or anything. And so just to go over the expenses, you had $2,000 for rent, you had $500 for electric, you had like $100 for gas, $100 for water. We had ADT in there, so that's about $30 or $40 a month. Costs about $300 or $400 a month to have all the popping candy in there for the inventory. So right around 3,000. And the place did really, really well. And Bernie was in, I think he had a 5-year with a 5-year option or something. And so his 5-year ended and he extended, and he was in there, I think on the second, he basically on the second year of his 5-year, what happened is Kroger left and it created a problem. So there were two problems here. The first thing that happened is Kroger built the store 3 blocks down the road and they moved. And they basically vacated this building. The problem is most of these people who have leases, what they get is they get a right to walk option in their lease. And what it means is basically we're here because Kroger's here. Kroger's our anchor store. If the anchor store leaves, we have the right to walk. And what ultimately happened is the drugstore left, and then the paint store left, and then the auto rental place left, and then the appliance place left, and everybody moved out. The only thing left was the pool room, the hardware store, and the lady who cut hair, but she was only there on appointments. And Bernie, his traffic completely did a nosedive. It completely fell off. So he went from making 12 to 15,000 a month down to $3,600 a month, and he was making no money at all. And it went like this for a very long time. And another problem with this is Kroger was an anchor store, and and generally what happens when your anchor leaves, you just go get another anchor. You basically go find someone else to move in. The problem is Kroger moved their store down the street. And this is a 60,000 square foot space. The only thing that it can be used for is a grocery store. It's too big for anything else. And so Kroger had a long-term lease, and they were not letting go of the lease. They were paying the lease so that no one else would go in there. And so unfortunately, Bernie didn't, there was nothing Bernie could really do because the landlord's hands were tied because they couldn't get another anchor store because Kroger wouldn't let go of the lease. And so to give you some insights on Bernie, I'm going to give you some stories because these are also extremely valuable. I learned a lot from him later on after I got to know him a lot better. So Bernie, like I said, he was very, very smart in business. Bernie was in his late 60s at this time, technically retired, but like I said, he had owned many muffler shops. He bought a bowling alley while he owned the pool room. He bought a bowling alley for his nephew, which we'll talk about. And he had land all over Indianapolis. Had a lot of property. And so Bernie would tell me these stories. So he had a muffler shop that was in Columbus, and the muffler shop was in a building, and they offered to sell the building for $200,000. Well, he had a professional appraiser come in, and they looked at the building and they said, yeah, you're on these 2 corners. It's a really good lot. You're in a good location, but you're a muffler shop. If you were a gas station, it'd be worth $200,000 or $225,000. But because you're a muffler shop, it's only worth about $175,000. And so Bernie didn't buy the place. Well, what happened is Cummins Engine went in across the road from Bernie's location, and they wiped out 5 city blocks. Then they're building a very large structure. They're building a factory right across the street from them, and they're 5 blocks down, taking up 5 blocks. And Bernie's sitting in his office one day, and a guy walks in and says, "What do you want?" He says, what will you take for your building?" And what's interesting is I wouldn't think to do this. Most people wouldn't think to do this, but Bernie said, "I will take 250,000 for the building." And the guy looked at Bernie and handed him a card and said, "I'm sure we can arrange something, and I'll be back in a few days." Now, what's interesting, Bernie clearly knew who these people were. These people were either attorneys or a realty office working for Cummins Engine, and Cummins was just buying everything. And so the guy walks out, and 30 seconds after the guy walks out, Bernie picks the phone up, calls his attorney, calls his banker, and says, "I need to borrow $200,000 for 30 days, and I'm going to buy this building, and then I'm going to sell it to Cummins the next day, and I'm going to make 50 grand." And sure enough, 30 days later, he closed, bought it for 200,000. The next day, he got 250,000, and he paid his loan off. And that's essential. And he would tell stories like this all the time. So essentially he made $50,000 overnight. But not only did he do that, they said, "Look, we're going to tear this building down. You can take anything you want out of it because we're tearing it down." And he was able to get doors, for lifts, truck lifts, and things like that. He was able to make a lot of money there. And another thing that happened while Bernie owned the pool room, his nephew worked for a bowling alley. The lady was about 80 years old, and she was wanting to sell. And so Bernie's nephew calls him and says, "Look, I'm managing this place. It does really, really good numbers, and she's wanting to sell, and I think we could get it at the right price. And if you want to come down and talk to him." Bernie went down there and he talked to the owner, and what he did is he bought the building, he bought the bowling alley, he bought everything. And then the next day he sold the bowling alley on a contract to his nephew, but he retained the building rights. He owned the building, so he sold the bowling alley, but he basically kept the real estate. He essentially bought the bowling alley to basically put his nephew in business pretty much. And like I said, I could go on and on with these. But back to our story, what ultimately happened is Bernie's not making any money. He basically says, "I'm not making any money. I'm going to sell this place. I'm going to sell all the equipment." And I'm talking to Bernie around the beginning of October, and Bernie's lease ends in April. And we're just having this conversation, and he says he'll take 10,000 for the place. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end out, and I'm going to come back and tell you the rest of the story.